They called him the Bloody Dwarf, a man whose signature sealed the fate of millions. Nikolai Yezhov, People's Commissar of the NKVD, the architect of fear, the master of darkness. From September 26, 1936, to November 24, 1938, the country drowned in blood under his rule. More than 1,340,000 convicted, 681,000 executed. And these are only the official numbers. But what's far more terrifying is hidden between the lines. Night arrests, shadows at the door, the whisper of neighbors, people vanishing without a trace. Fear became the currency of the era. Every denunciation could mean a death sentence. Every mistake, the end. And Yezhov himself. He vanished as suddenly as those he had condemned, as if someone had erased his name from existence, leaving only a stain of blood in history. What happened to the man who once held the fate of an entire nation in his hands? Why did the creator of the terror machine become its next victim? The answer is darker than you can imagine. A man from nowhere. Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov, a name that today stands as a symbol of fear and blood of the 1930s. But at the dawn of the century, he was just a poor boy from a working-class family. He was born on May 5, 1895, in the village of Lokot, Penza province, in the Russian Empire. His father was a metal worker, his mother a simple peasant woman. No one could have foreseen a future dictator of millions' destinies in the frail little boy who ran barefoot along dusty roads and often fell ill. He received only basic education at a rural school, 3 grades in total. At 14, he began to work, first as an apprentice mechanic, then as an assistant in a gardening estate. In 1905, when the First Russian Revolution erupted, little Nikolai saw how the Cossacks dispersed workers' rallies. Later, he would recall that fear of soldiers and whips, and together with it, a burning hatred toward the old regime. In 1914, the First World War began. Yezhov was drafted into the army, serving in reserve regiments, but rarely saw frontline combat. Comrades remembered him as silent, obedient, unremarkable. No heroics, no medals. Only the skill of adapting to every commander's mood. The February Revolution of 1917 opened new doors for him. That same year, he joined the Bolshevik Party and began serving in the Red Guard. The Civil War became his first true school of survival. He fought on different fronts, in Latvia, the Urals, and Turkestan. Not as a hero, but as a staff clerk, a quiet executor of orders. But during those years, he learned his most important lesson: absolute loyalty to the party. And superiors could save one's life and grant power. In the 1920s, Yezhov's career advanced rapidly. By 1922, he became secretary of a district party committee in Semipalatinsk, later moved to Petropavlovsk, and then to Kyrgyzstan. He mastered the art of internal bureaucracy, writing reports, monitoring discipline, and informing on the politically unreliable. Stalin and his inner circle valued such men, small, inconspicuous, but utterly loyal. In 1927, Yezhov was summoned to Moscow. That was the turning point. From that moment on, his life became inseparable from the party's central apparatus. He was appointed head of the Department of Cadre Records and Distribution in the Central Committee of the Communist Party. It seemed a secondary post, yet it gave him access to personnel files, secrets, and fates. There, he began collecting compromising material, building lists, shaping his future on the ruins of others. By the late 1920s, Nikolai Ivanovich was no longer invisible. He was short, only 152 centimeters tall, which earned him the nickname Hedgehog. But his influence grew steadily. He knew everyone and everything, because through his hands passed all appointments, dismissals, and reassignments. A man from nowhere had begun his climb to the summit of Stalin's pyramid of power, the road to the NKVD and the first purges. After moving to Moscow in 1927, Nikolai Yezhov firmly settled within the party's central apparatus. At first, he headed the Department of Personnel Records and Assignments in the Central Committee of the Communist Party. The position granted him invisible yet immense power to decide who would rise and who would be erased from the party lists. By 1929, Yezhov became deputy head of the Organizational and Distribution Department. There, he mastered the art of drafting protocols, compiling personnel reports, and creating what were known as trust folders. These folders contained the names of those who could become a problem for the party leadership. Every sheet of paper, every denunciation, could change a person's fate. And Yezhov quickly realized, true power did not lie in a pistol, but in a signature on a document. In 1935, Stalin entrusted him with a crucial mission: to inspect party organizations across the Soviet Union. Following the inspection, Yezhov submitted a report accusing local officials of leniency and indecision in the fight against saboteurs. Stalin liked the report. From that moment on, Nikolai Ivanovich became his loyal, little Stalinist shadow. In September 1936, Yezhov was appointed People's Commissar for Internal Affairs of the USSR, head of the NKVD. The appointment was a direct blow to the previous chief, Genrikh Yagoda, who was soon dismissed and later executed. Nikolai Ivanovich now controlled the entire repressive machine of the state: investigations, labor camps, internal security. His signature no longer determined careers. It determined who lived and who died. Within the first months of Yezhov's rule, arrests skyrocketed. In October 1936, mass purges began across the army and party ranks. At Yezhov's initiative, new limits were introduced, numerical quotas for identifying enemies of the people. It was a terrifying innovation. Every region had to deliver a set number of arrests and executions. For the first time in Soviet history, the killing of citizens became an official statistic. By December that year, a wave of arrests swept through the country. Former oppositionists, old Bolsheviks, industrial leaders. Yezhov personally took part in interrogations. Witnesses recalled how he would sit silently across from the accused, rolling a pencil between his fingers and quietly repeating, "Confess. It will be easier for you." Confessions were forced through torture, threats, and sleepless nights. Then came the swift verdict of a troika, usually execution. In 1937, Yezhov formally approved Orders No. 407 and No. 144, key directives of the Great Terror. They granted the NKVD the right to conduct mass operations against kulaks, spies, and Trotskyists without any proper investigation. It was, in essence, a license to kill. During this period, Nikolai Yezhov earned his unofficial title, the Iron Commissar. He appeared small, polite, even soft-spoken, but behind his smile hid a merciless machine of death. Every day, hundreds of execution lists landed on his desk, and he signed them without hesitation. The year 1937 marked the peak of his power. But it was also the beginning of his fall, because the same machine of terror he had built was already turning against its creator. The Great Terror, the apex of Yezhov's power. The year 1937 entered history as the year of mass arrests, executions, and fear. It was the peak of Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov's power. a small man with immense authority, who in a single year turned terror into the foundation of life for millions. The beginning of the purges. In February 1937, Yezhov headed a special commission to inspect Soviet industry and transport. Every accident at a factory, every malfunction on a railway line, he declared the work of enemies of the people. After the passenger train crash on the Moscow-Leningrad line in March of that year, more than 200 railway workers were arrested. No evidence, no expert reports, only Yezhov's signature on the order and confessions extracted under torture. That spring, he launched a campaign against so-called right-wing deviationists. At the March plenum of the Central Committee, Nikolai Ivanovich thundered, "We are surrounded by spies, traitors, and saboteurs. We must tear them out by the roots." Those words became the signal for mass arrests within the party elite. The purge of the army. In June 1937, a military operation began against the command of the Red Army. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky, commanders Yerenim Uborevich and Iona Yakir were arrested. Their trial lasted only 3 days. The charges were based on confessions obtained under torture. All were executed in the night of June 12th. It was a blow from which the army would not recover for years. According to NKVD data, over 10,000 officers of middle and high rank were arrested during that summer alone. Soldiers lived in fear, knowing that one wrong word could lead to a death cell. The National Operations. On July 31st, the Politburo approved Secret Order No. $25,000. Personally prepared by Yezhov, it instructed to cleanse the country of kulaks and anti-Soviet elements. Each region received strict quotas, how many to arrest, how many to execute. Within this framework, mass arrests of ethnic minorities began. In Moscow, for example, in September 1937, over 1,000 Poles, factory workers, engineers, doctors, were arrested in a single day. They were accused of spying for Poland. The evidence was fabricated, the verdict predetermined. The machine of terror. By October, Yezhov was signing hundreds of execution lists every day. Some documents bore the mark Category 1, meaning death by shooting. Historians preserved one such list from October 5th, 154 names. Beside them, the dry signature, Yezhov. No investigation, no defense, only death by quota. NKVD prisons overflowed. In Moscow's Lubyanka and Butyrka prisons, 40 to 50 people were held in single cells. Prisoners were kept for weeks without air. Interrogations went on day and night. Survivors recalled being forced to stand for 2 or 3 days without sleep. Those who refused to sign confessions were beaten with rubber truncheons, their fingers broken, their families threatened. The show trials. In November 1937, Moscow hosted the infamous trial of the parallel anti-Soviet Trotskyist Center. On the defendant's bench sat old Bolsheviks, Nikolai Bukharin, Alexei Rykov, and Genrikh Yagoda. The trial was broadcast on the radio. Newspapers covered it daily. Yezhov personally oversaw the investigation and obtained the heartfelt confessions. All defendants were sentenced to death. These trials became theaters of horror. The verdict known in advance, the audience craving blood. For ordinary people, the message was even more terrifying. If former ministers and marshals could be executed, no one was safe. The results of the Yezhovshchina. According to historians, in 1937 and 38 alone, over 1.5 million people were arrested. Hundreds of thousands were executed. Every morning, gunshots echoed in the basements of Lubyanka and in prisons across the country. The names of many victims remain unknown. The lists were destroyed, the cases falsified after the fact. At the time, Yezhov was hailed as a hero. He received the Order of Lenin, the Order of the Red Banner. Newspapers called him the Iron Commissar, the scourge of spies. At parades, he stood beside Stalin, one of his most trusted men. But by late 1938, whispers began spreading behind the Kremlin walls. The system of terror had slipped out of control. The country lived in panic. The economy faltered. The army bled from the loss of its officers. And the question began to echo everywhere. Who will be next? Even those who signed execution orders today knew that tomorrow their own names might appear on the list. The Fall of Yezhov and his end. The year 1938 marked the beginning of the end for Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov, a man who, in just 2 years, had risen to become second only to Stalin, suddenly found himself a stranger within his own creation. The terror he unleashed had begun devouring the country, and now it threatened its own master. The first cracks in power. By the spring of 1938, Stalin had grown increasingly dissatisfied with the NKVD's work. Despite millions of arrests, the enemies never seemed to disappear. Each day brought new lists, new denunciations, new accusations. But distrust was spreading. Too many innocents executed, too many officers lost, too much chaos. In May, Stalin ordered Lavrenti Beria to take control of the NKVD's special departments dealing with espionage. It was the first signal. Stalin's faith in Yezhov was fading. That summer, a scandal broke out. In the city of Kuibyshev, the entire leadership of a defense factory was executed. Months later, it was discovered that the charges of espionage had been fabricated by local NKVD officers simply to meet arrest quotas. Stalin was furious. For the first time in years, he asked Yezhov directly, "Why are your men shooting the innocent?" The rise of Beria. In September 1938, Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria was officially appointed First Deputy People's Commissar for Internal Affairs. Formally, Yezhov remained head of the NKVD, but in reality, power was shifting. Newspapers still praised the tireless Commissar Yezhov, yet within the Kremlin, everyone knew. His days were numbered. During this time, Yezhov began to drink heavily. Witnesses recalled that he would arrive late to important meetings, sometimes appearing in the Kremlin drunk. The fear, the pressure, the awareness that the machine he built might soon crush him, drove him deeper into alcohol. The arrests of his own men. By the autumn of 1938, arrests had begun among Yezhov's closest allies. The first was Israel Leplevsky, former NKVD chief of Ukraine. Then came Commander Matvey Berman, one of the founders of the Gulag system. Soon after, Nikolai Frenovsky, Yezhov's first deputy, was arrested and executed. All of them had once signed execution lists, proudly reporting successes in the fight against the enemy. Now they sat in the same Lubyanka basements where they had destroyed others' lives. With each new arrest, Yezhov's turn drew closer. Removal from office. In November 1938, Stalin summoned Yezhov to a closed Politburo meeting. There were plenty of accusations, chaos in investigations, the failure of intelligence operations, and economic disruption caused by excessive repression. Days later, it was announced that Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov was released from his duties due to health reasons. His position was officially taken over by Beria. Formally, Yezhov was given a new post, People's Commissar of Water Transport. But it was only a facade. In truth, he had been sidelined and placed under secret surveillance. The last months of freedom. The winter of 1939 became his last in freedom. Yezhov wavered between despair and hope. He wrote letters to Stalin, pleading for forgiveness, swearing loyalty. He begged for a chance to correct his mistakes, to return to work. No reply ever came. Meanwhile, the NKVD was already building a case against its former chief. Files were rewritten, inserting his name into old conspiracies. He was accused of plotting within the NKVD, of espionage for Poland and Germany. People he had once interrogated now testified against him. Arrest and interrogations. On April 10, 1939, Yezhov was summoned to the Kremlin for a conversation. He never returned. From that meeting, he was taken directly to Lubyanka. The arrest was kept secret. Newspapers remained silent. The interrogations lasted for months. He was accused of everything: spying for foreign powers, collaboration with Trotskyists, plotting to assassinate Stalin, and conspiring to overthrow Soviet authority. At first, Yezhov denied it all. But after weeks without sleep, torture, and threats against his wife and daughter, he broke and signed a confession. He was kept in solitary confinement, sometimes moved to crowded cells so other prisoners could encourage him to say what the interrogators wanted. The Chekists fabricated new conspiracies, wrote false protocols, and forced the former master of Lubyanka to sign them. Trial and execution. On February 13, 1940, a closed trial took place. Only a few members of the Supreme Court and prosecutor Andrei Vyshinsky were present. The verdict was read quickly: execution by shooting, with confiscation of property. In the night of February 4th, Yezhov was taken from his cell, handcuffed, and led to the basement, in the same place where he had ordered so many others to be shot. The gun fired once more, this time for him. His body was buried in a mass grave at the Donskoye Cemetery, without a name, without a marker. Thus ended the life of the man who destroyed hundreds of thousands and believed that fear would make him immortal. The system he created consumed him as well, leaving no trace, no memory, no grave with a name. The mechanics of Yezhov's terror. How the machine of repression worked. The terror of the late 1930s was not chaos, though it might have looked that way from the outside. It was systematic, cold, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. And at the head of that machine stood Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov. His orders turned fear into law and denunciations into death sentences. Step 1. The order from above. On July 31st, 1937, the infamous Order number 25,000 Valers was issued, signed by Yezhov and approved by the Politburo. It began with the words, "On the operation to repress former kulaks, criminals, and other anti-Soviet elements." Each region received limits: how many to arrest, how many to execute, how many to send to labor camps. For example, Moscow region, 10,000 arrests, 5,000 executions. Leningrad region, 8,000 arrests, 4,000 executions. These numbers were treated like production quotas, to be met at any cost. Step 2. The denunciations. Once the order was issued, the hunt began. Local NKVD offices scoured towns and villages for enemies of the people, often inventing them out of thin air. In rural areas, lists of former kulaks were drawn up, even including the dead or those already imprisoned. At factories, managers reported on workers to fulfill their quotas. One surviving document from the Kalinin region tells the story. A worker named Ilya Kovalyov wrote a denunciation against his neighbor. "I know he cursed the Soviet power, spoke ill of bread, perhaps a German spy." That was enough. The man was arrested, interrogated for 3 days, forced to sign a confession, and sentenced to death. Step 3. The Troikas. To speed up the process, Yezhov ordered the creation of special troikas. 3-man commissions consisting of the local NKVD chief, the prosecutor, and the party secretary. They considered cases without trial or investigation. Dozens of accused could be sentenced in a single evening. A surviving protocol dated August 5, 1937, lists 27 cases, 22 executions, 5 sent to labor camps. Not a single acquittal. Average time per hearing, 7 minutes. Step 4. The Commissar's signature. After the Troikas, the files were sent to Moscow. At Lubyanka, they were compiled into folders and carried into Yezhov's office. He flipped through the lists, added his signature, and wrote the date. Historians preserved one such document. List number 84, first category. 197 names. On the margin, a single word. Approved. That one word meant death. No appeal, no review. The next night, the condemned were led into basements and shot. Quietly, so no one would hear. Step 5. Quotas and overfulfillment. The system demanded not just compliance, but overfulfillment. If a region failed to meet its quota, its NKVD chief was dismissed or arrested. If it exceeded the plan, it was rewarded. In Sverdlovsk, in September 1937, local officials requested to raise their quota from 4,000 to 6,000 arrests, due to the discovery of more enemies. Moscow approved. Within a month, 6,000 people vanished. Some executed, others sent north to the camps. Step 6. Secrecy and destruction of evidence. Orders required that case files be destroyed once sentences were carried out. Many archives were burned, others falsified retroactively. Even today, the true number of victims remains unknown. Historians estimate between 600,000 and 1 million executed. Each day of those years was measured in hundreds of deaths. Example: an execution night in Moscow. On the night of October 26, 1937, 427 people were executed in Moscow's Butyrka prison. Lists arrived, names were read aloud. Prisoners led into the basement. 2 guards held the condemned, while the third fired a single shot to the back of the head. 10 seconds later, the next name. By dawn, all were dead. The bodies were taken to the Butovo firing range and buried in mass graves. That night was no different from hundreds of others. The machine of terror ran ceaselessly, a conveyor of death, and at its heart stood the signature of one man, Yezhov. Conclusion: the mechanics of repression were built on paper and numbers. There was no court, no justice, no defense. There was only the plan and the fear of failing to meet it. Thousands died simply because someone above decided there had to be that many enemies. Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov did not invent the system alone, but he perfected it, turning it into the main instrument of power. His name became a symbol of an era when human life was worth less than a sheet of paper bearing the Commissar's signature. The life and private world of Nikolai Yezhov. Who was the executioner outside Lubyanka? Nikolai Ivanovich. Yezhov entered history as the Iron Commissar. But who was he at home, away from the walls of Lubyanka? What kind of man hid behind the mask of the all-powerful executioner of the 1930s? A modest beginning. He was born in 1895 to a poor family of Latvian peasants. From childhood, he was accustomed to hard labor. He never attended a gymnasium, knew no foreign languages, and wrote with mistakes. When the revolution came, it seemed like a chance for a simple man to rise to power. In the 1920s, Yezhov worked in the party as a low-level clerk. He lived in modest apartments, wore worn-out suits, rode the tram to work. Contemporaries recalled him as quiet, unnoticeable, sober, never raising his voice. An ideal subordinate, obedient, diligent, invisible. A sudden rise. After his appointment as People's Commissar for Internal Affairs in 1936, his life changed completely. Yezhov received a luxurious apartment in central Moscow, a government car with a personal driver, and a state dacha with a garden and servants. Yet his peasant habits lingered. He disliked extravagance, ate simple food, porridge, herring, borscht. He seldom attended official banquets, feeling uncomfortable among the party elite. Family and private secrets, his wife, Yevgenia Fyodorovna, was his complete opposite. Bright, social, surrounded by artists, writers, and poets. Her salon became a gathering place for half of Moscow's bohemia. Yezhov was jealous, often quarreled with her, and sometimes disappeared at work for days. Historians still debate his private life. Rumors spread about affairs, bisexuality, even a secret relationship with the poet Mikhail Kuzmin. Those same rumors would later be used during his interrogations to humiliate the fallen Commissar. He had no children of his own. In 1937, he adopted a little girl named Natasha from an orphanage. Her fate turned tragic. After Yezhov's arrest, she was sent to a state home and later stripped of his surname. Character and habits. Despite his image as the Iron Commissar, in life Yezhov was nervous, easily irritated. He smoked constantly, sometimes drank, but until 38 remained self-controlled. He loved fishing, walks in the forest, and repairing furniture with his own hands. He read little, mostly reports, newspaper clippings, and arrest summaries. In Stalin's presence, he was soft-spoken, deferential. Even his voice changed, becoming higher, quieter. He considered himself the pupil of the leader, owing him everything. 2 lives by day. He turned the country into a zone of fear. He signed hundreds of death sentences, approved tortures, demanded new arrests. By night, he returned home, dined with his wife, chatted with guests, stroked his adopted daughter's hair. Neighbors remembered him as gentle, quiet, even shy. 2 lives, coexisting side by side, the executioner and the man. And one night, they collapsed together, when the terror he had built turned against its own creator. Yezhov and Stalin, a union of trust and fear. The relationship between Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov and Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin was unlike any other. It was not a partnership of equals, but a bond between an absolute master and an utterly obedient servant. Without that bond, there would have been no Yezhovshchina, no terror that etched itself forever into history. The first connection. Yezhov first caught Stalin's attention in the early 1930s. In 1933, he became head of the Department of Leading Party Organs in the Central Committee. His main talent was the ability to find and remove undesirable people without asking questions. Stalin took note. In a letter to Molotov from that period, he wrote, "Comrade Yezhov, a small man, but reliable, knows how to cleanse the cadres." It was the beginning of their future alliance. The appointment. After the assassination of Kirov and the start of the purges, Stalin needed a new head of the NKVD. Genrikh Yagoda, then in charge, seemed too cautious. In September 1936, Stalin personally proposed that Yezhov take over the post. The Politburo records state, "To appoint Yezhov People's Commissar for Internal Affairs and ensure support from the Central Committee." From that moment, a constant line of communication was established. Phone calls, private meetings, confidential reports, every single day. Loyalty without limits. Yezhov never questioned Stalin. Not a single order, not a single arrest figure. He called Stalin teacher, father, genius of the revolution. At a Politburo session in January 1937, During a discussion on the number of enemies in the army, Yezhov declared, "If Comrade Stalin orders us to find 10,000 spies, we will find them. If he orders 20,000, we will find them too." Those words entered the official record as a model of devotion. Secret meetings documents show that Yezhov visited Stalin's Kremlin office dozens of times each month. In May 1937 alone, 22 visits, sometimes lasting deep into the night. They reviewed lists of repressions, discussed the fates of marshals and the arrests of old Bolsheviks. A note from an assistant reads, "The leader and the Commissar drank tea, examined folders of cases, laughed for a long time at the confessions of enemies of the people. It was a strange alliance, a mix of trust and cruelty, of shared power over thousands of lives. Fear and dependence. Despite their apparent closeness, Yezhov lived in constant fear. He knew Stalin easily destroyed those who had done his dirty work. The fate of Yagoda, dismissed and later executed, was a vivid reminder. Historians discovered letters from Yezhov to his wife, in which he wrote, "Stalin is a god, but a terrible god. One misstep, and he'll wipe me away like dirt from his boot." The end of the Union. By 1939, when the Yezhovshchina reached its peak, Stalin decided to remove his Commissar. Yezhov was dismissed, reassigned to the minor post of People's Commissar of Water Transport. In April 1939, he himself was arrested. Stalin never spoke a word in his defense. On the contrary, he personally sanctioned the investigation and the execution. Thus ended the union of trust and fear, as all unions with the leader eventually did. The final months of power, the collapse of Yezhov's empire. Nikolai Ivanovich. Yezhov entered the year 1938 at the peak of his power. He controlled the fate of millions. His signature decided who would live and who would die. But within months, the fall began. A fall that nothing could stop. The beginning of the end. By March 1938, the Kremlin realized the terror was spinning out of control. Even loyal party officials were now afraid to speak. The economy was paralyzed, factories stood half empty, arrests had reached every corner of Soviet life. Stalin needed someone to blame. The scapegoat became Yezhov himself. Though it was the leader who had ordered the mass shootings, officially they were now described as excesses of the NKVD. Arrival inside Lubyanka. In September 1938, a new deputy appeared within the NKVD, Lavrenti Beria. He had been sent personally by Stalin to assist the Commissar. But assistance soon turned into supervision. Beria began reopening cases, reviewing execution lists, and reporting Yezhov's mistakes directly to the Kremlin. Whispers spread through Lubyanka. The master will soon replace the executioner with a new one. Even Yezhov himself heard the rumors. Strange orders by the autumn of 1938. Yezhov's decisions grew erratic. He signed contradictory orders, confused dates, issued illogical directives. Some said it was nerves. Others believed a secret struggle with Beria had begun. One example, the so-called Polish espionage case. Yezhov ordered nearly 15,000 executions, but Beria intervened, halted the operation, and sent many cases for review. Stalin pretended to observe from afar. But he was already choosing which of them would inherit the NKVD. A life falling apart. At the same time, his personal life collapsed. In November 1938, his wife, Yevgenia Fyodorovna, died under mysterious circumstances. Officially a suicide. Historians still debate whether it was self-inflicted or part of a cleanup of witnesses. Yezhov withdrew into himself, drank heavily, and rarely appeared in the Kremlin. His reports became erratic, filled with mistakes. His phone calls with Stalin grew shorter and colder. Desperate attempts to hold on. In December 1938, he organized a series of public trials trying to prove his usefulness. But the leader had already made his decision. In November, Beria was officially appointed Deputy People's Commissar with expanded powers, effectively taking control of the organization. By January 1939, Yezhov was summoned to the Kremlin. Stalin praised him for his service to the party, then calmly announced his transfer to the minor post of People's Commissar of Water Transport. Everyone understood what that meant. A death sentence disguised as a promotion. Lubyanka closes its doors. By February 1939, Yezhov was no longer head of the NKVD. Searches began in his former offices. Documents were seized or destroyed. Old cases reopened. Just months earlier, he had commanded the machinery of death. Now the corridors of Lubyanka echoed with whispers. He won't last long. The executioner of the Great Terror had become its next victim, and no one, not even Stalin, intended to save him. Arrest and investigation. How Yezhov was turned into an enemy of the people. Nikolai Ivanovich. Yezhov knew his end was near, but even he could not imagine how swiftly and mercilessly his former comrades would erase his name from existence. The spring of 1939 marked the beginning of the end for the Iron Commissar. The last day of freedom. He was arrested on April 10th, 1939. That morning, he attended an official meeting, signing papers as usual. By evening, a knock came at the door of his Moscow apartment. NKVD officers, now loyal to Beria, presented the warrant. The words were brief and cold. For anti-Soviet conspiracy and treason against the motherland. Just the day before, he himself had signed such warrants for others. Now they were signed for him. The beginning of the interrogations. Immediately after his arrest, Yezhov was taken to the inner prison at Lubyanka. Records show the first interrogations lasted for days without pause. He refused to confess. He repeated that he had always served Stalin and the party, that every order he carried out came directly from the leader. Investigator Bogdan Kobulov told him, "Comrade Stalin does not make mistakes. If you are arrested, you are an enemy." The sentence was passed long before the trial. The accusations. The investigation produced a long list of charges: espionage for Germany and Poland, a conspiracy inside the NKVD, the murders of Kirov and Tukhachevsky, even an assassination plot against Stalin himself. Documents show that many points were copied from older cases. Some dates didn't even match. But the goal was clear: to destroy the former commissar and erase him from party history. Torture and confessions. Only fragments of the truth survived in the protocols. Yezhov was beaten, deprived of sleep, kept in an unheated cell. Sometimes he was denied food and water for days. He signed confessions, then tried to retract them. But the papers were already filed. Witnesses claimed that in May 1939, he was forced to read his own confessions aloud before other prisoners. They mocked him, laughed, demanded new spy connections. The former master of Lubyanka had become a plaything in the hands of his own machine of terror. The last meeting with Beria. In June 1939, Beria personally came to the interrogation. He spoke softly, almost kindly. "Nikolai Ivanovich, tell us everything. It will save your life." But there was nothing left to save. The verdict had already been decided. The trial as a performance. The trial took place in February 1940. A closed session, no press, no witnesses. The charges were read monotonously. The defense remained silent. The verdict: death by shooting, with confiscation of property. No appeal, no mercy. The man who once ruled over life and death now faced the same judgment he had given to thousands of others. Waiting for the end. After the trial, Yezhov was kept in solitary confinement. Witnesses recalled that he had grown thin, aged by 10 years, muttering to himself. In one note later discovered, he had written, "I built this machine. Now it has ground me to dust." On the night of February 4th, 1940, he was led into the prison yard. A single bullet to the back of the head. His body was buried secretly in a mass grave at the Donskoye cemetery. His name was erased from all books and official records. The myth of Yezhov. How the memory of the executioner and his family was erased. The story of Nikolai Ivanovich. Yezhov did not end with his execution. After February 4th, 1940, a new stage began. The destruction of his very name. The same country where he had ruled through terror now chose to erase him completely. But erasure is not forgiveness. Erased from the record. Immediately after the execution, the NKVD issued a secret order. It required Yezhov's name to be removed from all transcripts, minutes, and decrees wherever possible. Where deletion was impossible, the note, "Enemy of the People," was added. Historians later found Beria's directive from 1940. All publications mentioning the former Commissar Yezhov are to be withdrawn from libraries. Documents must be revised, corrected, unnecessary materials destroyed. The purge of archives was meticulous. Some Central Committee resolutions were retyped entirely just to eliminate his signature. Photographs without Yezhov. Photographs of the era underwent strange transformations. In pictures where Yezhov once stood beside Stalin, his image simply vanished. The most famous example, the photograph on the banks of the Moscow-Volga Canal, taken in the summer of 1939. In the original, Yezhov smiles next to the leader. A year later, the same photo reappeared in newspapers, but without him, as if he had never existed. This became standard practice. Hundreds of images were retouched. Thus was born the myth of Stalin's infallibility. Enemies simply disappeared from history. The new propaganda. The same newspapers that once glorified the tireless Commissar now called him a traitor. They claimed he had worked for foreign spies, that he had deliberately destroyed loyal citizens. Magazines published articles titled, "How Enemy of the People Yezhov Tried to Ruin the Party." His name vanished from textbooks. Even the term Yezhovshchina was avoided. The official narrative insisted there had been no excesses. And if there had, it was the fault of one man alone, while the party remained pure. The fate of his family. After Yezhov's arrest, his family was doomed. His wife died in 1938 under mysterious circumstances. His adopted daughter, little Natasha, was sent to an orphanage labeled "Child of an Enemy of the People." She was later adopted, given a new surname. Only decades later, after Stalin's death, did she learn who her real father was. Yezhov's relatives were repressed, some sent to camps, others simply vanished. Legends and whispers. Among the people, his name lived on in whispers. Stories spread about his black lists and the night trains carrying prisoners away. It was said he kept stacks of arrest warrants in his pockets, signing them even while dining in restaurants. Rumors claimed he had never died, that he had escaped abroad, that his execution was faked. These legends kept the fear alive, because the machine of terror still worked. Only the names of its operators had changed. Rehabilitation? Never. After Stalin's death, the Soviet Union began a partial rehabilitation of the victims of 1937. But Yezhov's name was never cleared. Officially, he remained a traitor and enemy of the people. In his famous 1956 speech, Khrushchev mentioned him only briefly. The crimes of Yezhov were monstrous. Not a word that those crimes had been ordered by Stalin himself. The late archives only in the 1990s did historians gain access to some of Yezhov's case files. They revealed the truth. The accusations were fabricated, the confessions extracted under torture. But that did not change his reputation. For some, he remains the face of bloody terror. For others, a tool in Stalin's hands, a pawn discarded once it outlived its use. The echo of a name today, Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov's name, is rarely spoken aloud. There are no streets, no monuments, no museums. Only historians and investigative journalists still dig through the dust of his era. Yet one word survives: Yezhovshchina. It became a symbol of mass fear, of a merciless machine ready to crush anyone. Thus the myth was built. First glorification, then complete erasure. A man who once decided the fates of millions vanished from history, as if he had never lived. Only the documents remain, distorted, edited photographs, and one dreadful word carved forever into the nation's memory. We have turned the final page of this dark chapter. We have remembered Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov, the man whose name became a symbol of fear and ruthless repression. The year 1937 claimed millions of lives, and even the executioner who ruled over life and death became a victim of the same machine of terror. This story reminds us how easily power can become an instrument of fear, and how vital it is not to forget the past, no matter how terrible it was. If you believe such investigations matter, if truth should not drown in silence, support our work. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications, so that the memory of the victims of terror may live on, and such tragedies never happen again.